You know, last week was not exactly a strong one for the United States internationally. On Afghanistan, both Great Britain and France refused the U.S. any major support. Russia officially said no to sanctions for Iran after months of diplomatic back and forth. China also ruled out backing sanctions, and many folks are blaming the absence of cooperation on America's own lack of a tough stance on major issues. But why does the U.S. need to be the one who takes the lead? Well, Michael Goodwin is a columnist, Pulitzer Prize winning columnist with the New York Post and Fox News contributor. He joins us now. Michael, good to see you. You're a lot more blunt than we were diplomatic in that introduction. You said America got its butt kicked all over the globe last week. Really?
Well, look, I think you have to, if you regard the Iranian situation and the Afghanistan-Pakistan war, or wars, however you want to look at that, but if you look at those two main foreign policy challenges as the most difficult and the most important facing America right now, I would say, yes, last week was a very bad week. And it was a very bad week not just because of what happened in that week, but what it says about going forward on both of these fronts.
Well, and you point to the United Nations and the failure there. But look, when the United Nations accuses Israel of war crimes for its self-defensive actions in reference to the launched attacks from Gaza on innocent Israeli women and children, I mean, nobody takes that seriously, right?
Well, except that it does have potential consequences, that if this does get forwarded to The Hague for international the courts, which then could prosecute Israel for war crimes, which would mean Israeli officials could be arrested if they left Israel and went to certain countries that would enforce a warrant. So it is there's a real consequence. But beyond that, Greg, I think what it does, it legitimizes, or at least attempts to legitimize, really what is the Hamas strategy of hiding behind civilians, packing explosives in church, in mosques, in schools, and in hospitals, and then firing at the Israelis and effectively challenging them to fire back, and then screaming, you know, barbarism once the Israelis do fire back to protect themselves. Well, you know, so that's what's at stake here.
And on Iran and sanctions, I mean, nobody with a brain really expected Russia and China to actually help us in terms of sanctions, right? I mean, you'd have to be pretty naive to believe that. But
well, but the White House did. I mean, the White House did believe that. I think they have more than half a brain. But certainly when Medvedev told President Obama around the UN that Russia saw sanctions as inevitable on Iran, that's now been walked back. That's inoperative now, as they used to say in Washington. So for Russia to really effectively jerk us around that way, and for Hillary Clinton to go over there and not only to not get the yes she sought, but to get an absolute no, for Putin to refuse to meet with her. This was an amazing setback that has long-term consequences.
Well, and in fact, let me quote you in your column, and we'll put it up on the screen in that reference. Secretary Clinton, who in last year's campaign promised to obliterate Iran if it used nuclear weapons, now says she retains a small space for doubt that Iran is actually trying to get nukes. I mean, is she gullible? Is she naive? How do you regard that?
It was an extraordinary statement, and it comes out of an interview that Secretary Clinton did with Cynthia McFadden on ABC News for Nightline. And I really urge our viewers to go and find that transcript online and to read it, because it was an extraordinary interview where she said essentially that the United States regarded sanctions as a failure of diplomatic policy, and therefore it would continue with diplomatic policy. And the implicit assumption there is diplomacy only began once Barack Obama took office. In fact, there has been an effort for years and years, going back to the Clinton administration, to get Iran to stop its nuclear program. So this notion that we're going to continue down this path, that sanctions would be regarded as failure. And then later in the interview, she is asked, do you have any shred of a doubt that Iran is actually trying to get nuclear weapons, as as opposed to just developing nuclear energy for personal, for peaceful purposes. And Hillary Clinton says, yes, there is a shred of doubt. Now, that is an extraordinary statement. That has not been the United States policy, and Iran is in violation of numerous UN resolutions, specifically on this issue. So for the Secretary of State at this point to introduce a sense of doubt, that's an extraordinary step backwards.
You claim the president is dithering on his commitment to Afghanistan. Are you sure you're not misinterpreting what is essentially considered and valuable and time-consuming deliberations?
I think deliberation is terrific, but let's not forget that this president said he was changing the policy. And once you say that openly, you better be prepared to do it quickly. And now, even today, Secretary Gates saying basically, well, we have to wait till this election thing is resolved, buying the president more time. Look what's happened in the meantime. Our casualties have gone up, and Pakistan has gotten worse. Last week's attack on what is effectively Pakistan's Pentagon was the third in a year. And every time it happens, Secretary Clinton or Secretary Gates comes out and says, don't worry, the nuclear weapons in Pakistan are safe. Well, I do worry when they start assuring me not to worry. And sooner or later, if Pakistan implodes, we are going to have Al-Qaeda and the Taliban with nuclear weapons. That's what's at stake here. So every day does matter, as long as the president sits there and doesn't make a decision.
Michael Goodwin, always good to see you.